Hundreds of drones have been spotted flying over German military installations. Just who or what could be so interested in the German military's operations? But is this just a continuation of those drone flights over U.S. military installations that, well, never seem to have stopped? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this. So, hit that subscribe button, by the way, guys. That really helps me out if you're interested in this kind of content. So this is according to the German newspaper Bild. About over 500 drones have been spotted over important sites in Germany in just the last 3 months. These include military installations, airports, defense enterprises, and energy facilities. So again, sawing important spots is doing a lot of work here. These are critical infrastructure essential to the defense of Germany. Now, why would someone want to do this? In fact, between January and March, they recorded 270 incidents with involving over 536 separate drones. All right, obviously, several of those cases, you had 2 or more UAVs, generally flying between 6 p.m. and midnight, so flying at night, and with just 13% occurring during the day, right? And of course, these spy flights occurred in 117 different instances of military facilities, including naval bases and air bases, including U.S. air bases like Ramstein Air Base and Bremerhaven. Now, the thing that is most troubling about this, one, is that not so much that this is happening, because as we know, Germany has, well, international enemies, particularly Russia and Russian-affiliated countries like Belarus. So it's no secret that they are deeply concerned about, well, the operations of the German military. In fact, Russia has not just for future military plans, but Germany is quickly becoming one of the largest contributors to Ukraine's defensive efforts. And so if Russia wants to know what kind of aid and weapons are transiting through Germany, well, they have an incentive to conduct extensive reconnaissance operations. And that's essentially what this is. But civilian airports, railways, stations, defense enterprises, government administrative buildings, all of which could provide detail about current Ukraine operations. But energy infrastructure says that this isn't just about that, because energy infrastructure is going to run pretty much no matter what, whether they're shipping, grain to Ukrainians or, air defense systems. So that says that the German, or rather whoever's doing the spying, almost certainly the Russians again, are very, very focused not just on current operations, but on some sort of future conflict, right? Because as we know, the Russian armed forces conducted a kind of pre-invasion, when they invaded Ukraine, a pre-invasion sort of hybrid attack in which they used cyber warfare, sabotage, espionage, and insiders to take down not just the Ukrainian armed forces, but critical Ukrainian infrastructure like banks, energy transmission facilities, communications. Their goal was to shut down the country, to paralyze Ukrainian defenses. Now, bear in mind, Ukraine, unlike Germany, had spent at the time of the invasion literally a decade working with primarily the United States to harden their military and civilian infrastructures against Russian attacks. Because unlike Germany, that sort of deludes itself into thinking that it doesn't need a military, that the world's a peaceful, happy place. We don't need all these mean tanks. We're just going to scare people. The Ukrainians understood that their neighbor Russia had invaded the country of Georgia. They had annexed part of Ukraine in 2014. So it's no shock at all that these guys were much better prepared. And well, the fact is, you might say, I've read a lot of articles. They say Germany is really, becoming much more committed to its defenses. Well, obviously not, given that it is not a secret, not a surprise that drones are a huge component of warfare, not just attack drones, but espionage drones, right? Reconnaissance drones as well. So you would think that it would be trivially easy for these countries to have some kind of authorization, some kind of defensive system to stop drones from just flying arbitrarily over a military installation. You'd think that would be pretty important, right? And again, it can be done with something as simple as a drone jammer or a drone interceptor. But no, based on the fact that we're seeing hundreds of drones literally a month between January and March. So in 90 days, you're talking about 500 plus drones. There's clearly zero defensive capabilities of these bases, zero ability to track a drone, zero ability to respond in any measurable way. And it's not just the German military that's subject to this. This is kind of one of my biggest gripes, and it was my gripe last year, and it remains my gripe now. This is an article from May 3rd that the Pentagon still has absolutely no idea who is flying drones over military installations in 2023. And this is from a Virginia state rep who said that the Pentagon reported 350 drones flying over 100 U.S. military installations in 2024. So nothing changed about any of those, right? 350 different national security breaches, right? And while some of what the U.S. knows is classified, the House Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee on Military and Foreign Affairs described the incursions as, quote, not from hobbyists being blown off course. And that just makes sense, right? Think about your day-to-day life. You as a regular person, how many hobbyist drones do you see in a year, right? Maybe less than 5 for sure. Unless you live next to some kind of drone nerd, less than 5. So the fact that we're talking about military installations suddenly seeing hundreds tells you right there, it's not an accident, right? And again, in fact, South Carolina rep who sits on the accountability subcommittee said, quote, this appeared to be a coordinated effort by our adversaries to collect valuable intelligence surveillance of our most sensitive military equipment. And of course, despite this being a year ago, the Pentagon witnesses said the military is still trying to improve its response, i.e. have any response. And weird, remember, the official stance of the administration, the previous administration, by the way, the Biden administration, was that these drones were nothing, that they were mass hysteria, that there were no flights in the area, that there was nothing happening. These drones were an absolute, they were mass hysteria. But quietly, that narrative appears to have changed, right? In fact, here they say there were mass drone incursions over Joint Base Langley Eustis in December 2023. This is literally coming from Rear Admiral Paul Spadaro, Vice Director of Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Huh. Talk about a U-turn. Now those drones were all real, right? And interesting, Spadaro said he could provide, when asked if there were more drones, Spadaro said, yes, it's a growing problem, but I can't tell you exactly by how much because that's classified, right? And he said there's gaps in technology that give those flying drones an advantage. In general, he said the technology to field systems has outpaced the technology to defeat those systems, which is sort of true, but it's absolutely false to say these drones are unstoppable, right? Again, there's literally government contractors that have interceptors, companies like Anduril, in addition to what the Ukrainians fly, in addition to the fact that a lot of their interceptors are literally just drones. You just have an operator fly the drone into the other drone. And even if you say, oh, that's too dangerous, what if the drone crashes onto an innocent soldier who's just washing their car? You can still use jamming tech to get these drones out of the sky, right? So this is what I want to point out here is that, one, the U.S. almost certainly knows who is actually doing this, right? And it's almost certainly either Russia, in the case of Germany, or China. Because, again, the German spy chief, this is from just 2 weeks ago, said that Russia's hybrid attacks are stepping up so that they can't go out and say that these drones targeting German military installations are Russian. But it's weird that this report drops and then Germany's military counterintelligence head said, quote, we're talking about a sharp increase in cases of espionage and hybrid measures. The approach is more massive and more aggressive, right? And this, of course, the number of cases where Russian involvement is suspected has doubled in the last year, according to the counterintelligence chief. So what's important about this is that this is further evidence, first off, of two things. The first is that it's evidence that the Russian designs on Ukraine are not limited to Ukraine, right? The fact that Russia is using its very limited resources to continue to conduct espionage and sabotage operations against Germany tells us, and particularly German infrastructure like energy infrastructure, tells us that this is about planning for a future attack on the country of Germany. And if you're Putin, there's no reason not to, because as we point out, that the Russian military numbers about 600,000 troops right now and growing. The German military, in contrast, has less than 100,000 troops, right? So if Russia can defeat Ukraine, then the Russian military and Russia's war economy is essentially able to either literally invade Europe itself, invade Germany itself, or is going to be able to simply coerce European countries into submission, right? Through the threat, right? Because if you have 600,000 troops on your border and they say, listen, we know every one of your military installations, we can put drones, right, on every one of those installations. Because that's the other takeaway, is that some of these drones are attempted to be flown in secret, but it's obvious that they know, it's public knowledge. And so this may also be a signal from Russia to Germany that says, listen, you know these drones are weapons. I know these drones are weapons. And as you can see, we Russians are capable of putting these drones right on top of every single installation, energy infrastructure, port, railway, satellite that you care about. And that's a message in and of itself. Again, it's sort of like, imagine having a neighbor who just points an unloaded gun at you and goes, click. Would you consider that a threat? Yeah. Well, how is that different from pointing an unloaded drone to a military installation and going, click? So again, and that's part of probably the message that's being sent to the US too. And it's kind of humiliating, frankly, that the United States, that the largest, the country that is supposedly the largest, most capable military in the world, cannot simply jam a drone. Something that, again, the Ukrainians have been doing actively for at least the last 3 years. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. A huge thank you to everybody. Check the links in the description. We're raising funds for Ukrainian counter-drone measures. It's in the description and in the pinned comment. Cheers.